How's it going, everyone? Guess what I'm vlogging on? I got a new camera, I got the FX3. So yeah, I actually made a whole video about it already, but then like the sound was really messed up, so I decided to again. Basically, I was trying to record the sound from the camera a lot of the time to like give an example of the sound, but actually like the wind was really bad that day, and so a lot of it was just like, you know, like bad wind sound. So I decided to kind of reshoot the video. So here we are again. Just kind of, we're going to Camden today. So yeah, it's been a long time coming to buy the FX3. As you know, I've had the A7 IV for years. That's like been just glued to my hand for years. And you know, I love that camera. So actually, kind of buying an FX3 was like, you know, a kind of a decision, like, do I really need to get it? But now actually on first impression, so I got it about a week ago actually, done a few shoots with it. And what I would say is, you know, I read some things online from people saying that the A7 IV was quite similar to the FX3 in a lot of ways, in terms of the sensor and that. But actually, I kind of like really disagree. From the moment I started using the FX3, I just felt like, especially when it comes to shooting in a bit of low light and stuff, behaves very differently. The sensor behaves very differently, and just has more of a, I think because of the low megapixel count as well, just that kind of more glued together kind of look. Obviously you can see it right now because I'm vlogging on the FX3. But yeah, I just felt like it's really different from the A7 IV personally. I think that if you're not like a proper kind of shooting all the time, then you probably wouldn't notice that much of a difference. But if you're shooting day in and day out, then you're probably going to notice a difference.
Nice jewelry. The thing is, I've been coming to Camden quite a lot. I haven't actually been seeing it very much.
No, yeah. No, it's beautiful down this bit. This is like all the new bit of Camden.
Yeah, I've been coming down this way. This is the way I was coming when we were catching the bus.
So I've had this camera for about a week now, and obviously there's a lot of people talking about this camera, and there's a lot of people who have done some great kind of reviews on it. So this is just going to be my experience of having this camera for, you know, the first week, and a few things that I've found, especially coming from the A7 IV. So I've been shooting on the A7 IV for, you know, the past 2-3 years. About that thing's literally been glued to my hand, you know, in all that time. It's just been an amazing camera, and I was super happy with it. So this is just my experience of the first week of shooting with the FX3 though, and the few things that I've found. One thing I would say is obviously this camera is very popular due to the fact that it has, you know, the two base ISOs, and they're very different. So the first one is 800, the second one is 12,800, which is a huge jump. And one thing I would say is when you're shooting in low light, that second base ISO of 12,800 looks absolutely incredible. It just looks so clean. Like this camera, obviously, as does the A7S III, have a reputation of being like insanely good at low light, and that second base ISO is white. I mean, on the first night I got it, I was just shooting some test footage in my room, and you know, lighting up just with a candle. And you can see there's just no grain. It just looks absolutely insane. So if you're shooting like a DJ set or live music, you want your camera to really shine in dark places, then this is definitely the camera for you. That sensor is absolutely incredible. So I got some footage I took at my mate's barbecue the other night, and it was quite a dark barbecue, normally just lit up by 1 or 2 lights. So this is the footage I got from it. Obviously you can really see how it performs in the low light.
Labels blowing up my line and got me missing calls. Told her you ain't gotta hit me till you licking balls. Feel like ZVF, baby, I be cooler than the mink weather. Make a Coke bottle, give me brain till I think better. Back up on my shit again, hanging out with Benjamin. Franklin got me stankin' in the Lincoln, talking dividends. Look at what we did again, brought the water dipping in. Down in Texas on them elbows where your digits been. All these niggas pussy, I can smell it through the audio. Lapping everybody, got me working on my cardio. Party over daddy home, creeping out the caddy comb. Straight from underground, I got these motherfuckers Maddie on. I've been kick pushing on my grind since the pro skate. I don't fuck with niggas, you would figure that I'm pro hate.
So yeah, so what do you think of that footage? It looks absolutely amazing. But as I mentioned, you know, because it's got those 2 base ISOs, once it kind of clocks from the first to the second, you can really see a difference. And look at this clip right here, you can actually see where it kind of really switches over. It goes like really, really grainy, and then just hits that second base ISO and just cleans up completely. but you can see it kind of fluctuating between the two. So that's something, as I mentioned, I haven't really seen before on the A7 IV, because the base ISOs were quite close. I think there was like 800 to 3200. It wasn't getting too grainy by the time I hit that second base ISO. But I know some people are going to say, well, you know, you shouldn't have it on auto ISO. A lot of people just leave their base ISO and then kind of use the aperture to adjust the exposure or even the shutter speed. But I kind of have always done that. I like to leave my aperture as wide as possible, and then my shutter on, you know, normally relating to whatever frame rate I'm using, and then use my ISO to then adjust the light. But that's obviously something that I have to be aware of now with this camera, is that, you know, flicking between the two, I don't really think that's that realistic, just because it looks quite crazy when it goes super grainy and then goes super clean again. But anyway, let's talk about the good and bad points of my first week of shooting with this camera. And I'm not going to go into too much of a kind of technical detail, because like I'm pretty bad at that kind of stuff anyway. To me, it's more just about the user experience. Obviously, the good things I've found, there's many good points. You know, the footage just looks absolutely insane from this camera. I think it's the kind of low megapixel count that gives it a less kind of sharpened look to the A7 IV. It's more like a kind of glued together, that very like filmic soft look. I definitely noticed that different from the A7 IV. The A7 IV, because obviously I had a lot higher megapixel count, it looked a tiny bit, it looks kind of like sharper, but I wouldn't say necessarily in a good way, like, you know, kind of the way mobile phones look sharper. Don't get me wrong, the A7 IV still just looks absolutely incredible, but yeah, there's something about this camera that just kind of looks a bit softer, a bit smoother. So I kind of like that, especially obviously in low light, which is obviously the second good point, is the low light capabilities are absolutely incredible, especially as I mentioned, once you hit that second base ISO. The 120 frames per second looks absolutely amazing. It does have a little 1.1 crop, but it's barely noticeable. Another thing I've also noticed is you can't use stabilization when you have when you're using 120 frames per second, but I don't think that's too much of a big deal either, for me anyways. So I've just switched over to my A7 IV, so I can just show you a bit of the body of this camera and talk a bit more about the good and the bad points I found about it. It's also so you can compare the quality of the A7 IV and see the difference, but it's kind of hard to tell, right? So as I mentioned, some of the great points about this camera is I do really love the body. It feels really chunky. It's obviously got the inbuilt fans, which stops overheating, which I've only really experienced a couple of times on my A7 IV, but very rarely, especially if you have it set to high. I like these red lights, so you have one on top here that kind of goes around the record button when you hit record. There's also this little bar at the back here, this little bar here at the back that basically lights up red. And then there's a little light here at the front as well that lights up when you hit record. And this is great. The other night I was filming a show and I could, and I was quite far away from my camera, but I could kind of see that it was still recording, which was super helpful. I like the big fat record button on the top as well. And I like all these kind of screw holes, so you can start creating a little rig out of your FX3, which is actually why I bought this camera over the A7S3, is that I wanted to start building a rig around it. It is a bit more expensive. I think it clocks up to maybe about £700 more now than the A7S3. So I got this far just under £3,000, whereas I think you can get the A7S3 now on a really good kind of price for about 2,200 or 2,300. So it definitely is, a bit more expensive, the FX3. But I did buy it because I like the body and I wanted to start kind of creating a bit more of a rig around the FX3. Another thing as well is that the FX3 is Netflix approved. But I kind of think this is a bit bullshit, because if you actually shot a documentary on the A7S3 and then gave it to Netflix, they probably wouldn't even be able to tell a difference. I think that's just kind of maybe a bit of a marketing thing, or I'm not quite sure why they've kind of done that. But I definitely did take that in when deciding between the FX3 and the A7S3. But really, there's very few bad points to talk about when it comes to the actual picture of this thing. I mean, in low light, it looks absolutely incredible with 10-bit color. Just everything that, like I said, I would love about the quality of any kind of Sony. I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. I don't really even need to say too much about that. They've shot now their creator on it, and, they're starting to shoot films on this camera, which is absolutely amazing. I'm definitely so happy I bought this camera. Even though there's not a huge difference between the A7 IV, I feel like there's enough of a difference when I'm shooting on it, and that bigger kind of ISO and more flexibility in the low light. Now, let me just kind of nitpick a tiny bit and talk about a couple of the bad points I don't like about it. And really, as I mentioned, there's very few. Literally the only thing I don't like about it is, as I've mentioned, about the ISO, about when it clocks up onto that second base ISO, but it's so grainy before. Because as I mentioned, I'm the kind of shooter that I like to just leave the ISO on auto. and kind of let the camera do its thing. So it's just something I'm gonna have to be wary of. And by the way, I don't do that all the time. It's a controlled lighting environment. I normally just expose to skin tone and leave the ISO at that. I'm just talking about more run and gun stuff, you know, when I'm just shooting at events or something like that, and you're going inside and outside and it's completely different lights and you're shooting stuff really spontaneously. It's easier just sometimes to let the camera just kind of take a lot of the heavy lifting and kind of take care of the exposure itself. And that's the only time I'd leave the ISO and auto. The only second complaint I'm going to have about it is the labeling of the buttons. This says focus peaking right here, and this says zebras. And the whole great thing about Sony cameras is they're super customizable in terms of the buttons. And for some reason, and I always think it's a bit strange that they label their buttons. I mean, the first thing I did was not make that peaking. I wouldn't turn focus peaking on and off during a shoot. I just wouldn't really do that. It's not something that I need in such a quick way to put a button there specifically for it. And the same with the zebras. I normally leave these on all the time. I normally have them on all the time. So the first thing I did was to kind of change these buttons to something else. So it's kind of random that they are labeled those things, because now it's like, it says peaking on there, but it's not for peaking. So I kind of like it when Sony just leaves buttons very like open and free, kind of like this button, you know, up the top here, the swivel wheel, it just has nothing on it. Although underneath it says focus magnification, but that's for button 5, which once again, I've changed to a different thing. I've made that now manual and automatic toggle, focus toggle. So I kind of like the way Sony allows you to kind of customize all your own buttons. That's such an amazing thing about it. And then to label those buttons just makes no sense. I don't think many people are going to use the labels that they have actually put on these cameras. So I don't really know why they would leave them there. But that's it really. That's the only thing that I would kind of really moan about so far with this camera. Everything else I find absolutely amazing. It was raining heavily a couple of days ago and I was shooting in the rain, and I have heard that it's water sealed, but I find it hard to believe with these fans so exposed. But it still is working, and I love shooting in the rain, so I know hopefully it is heavily water sealed. I know the A7 IV is. I literally taken that thing on a boat with me where I was literally having buckets of water thrown all over me. Definitely probably a bit too wet for definitely a bit more wet than a camera should be, but it was absolutely fine for me. So so I hope the FX3 is the same, because you know, I'd hate to be, obviously being in London, it rains all the time. It was literally just pouring down rain again, and I hope that it doesn't get water damage. Anyway, I'm going to switch back over to the FX3 and get a few more shots in Camden, and then I might call it a day. So yeah, as I mentioned, you're probably going to get real in-depth reviews around this camera and other places. I know it's been around for quite a while, so you know, there's a lot of other channels that do real technical reviews, but obviously I'm trying to really think about the usability of it, because to me that's all I care about is when I switch it on and I start using it, how does it feel, how's the footage look when it comes out. And so far, you know, as I mentioned, it looks amazing, and I'm really looking forward to basically just kind of getting stuck in and using this camera on bigger projects. So yeah, if you just come across my channel, please like, please subscribe, because I'm going to be using this camera now for pretty much all my videos. So yeah, please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.
Did it again, got me on 10, got me on 10, got me on 10, got me on 10. Did it again, got me on 10, got me on 10, got me on